Good afternoon and welcome everyone. We're a little bit past the hour, so we'll get started. Welcome everyone to the second meeting of the Wellington Circle Study Working Group. My name is Michaela Niles and I'm the MassDOT project manager for this effort. And I'm joined today by colleagues from MassDOT as well as members of the consultant team. And I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today and thank our working group members in attendance, including the elected officials on the call today. So before we launch into today's presentation, I'd like to open with a few procedures for today's meeting. Next slide, please. So first, please note that this virtual public meeting is being recorded. The Massachusetts Department of Transportation may choose to retain and distribute the video, still images, audio, and/or chat transcript. And by continuing attendance with this virtual public meeting, you are consenting to participate in a recorded event. All recordings and chat transcripts will be considered a public record. And if you're not comfortable being recorded, please turn off your camera, keep your microphone muted, and refrain from chatting in the chat box. Working group members will have the opportunity to ask questions and share comments at points throughout the presentation. To participate, you may use the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen, or if you're participating by phone, you may dial *9. I'll then call your name and unmute you so that you can share your question or comment. We ask that you please keep your microphone muted unless speaking, and we ask that all presenters start by stating their name. This will benefit everyone, especially those who are participating by phone today. Working group members will be able to share their video. You may keep your video on or off, but the main request is to minimize distractions for others who are viewing the presentation. Members of the public in attendance today may submit questions or comments at any time in writing using the Q&A, and meeting staff will address the questions as time allows at the end of the presentation. And if you need any technical assistance, please reach out to Leah Epstein at lepstein@hntb.com. Next slide, please. So as part of today's agenda, we'll have a brief review of the study process. Then we'll talk a little bit about existing conditions, both with regard to the planning context and the multimodal transportation network. From there, we'll have a discussion of issues and opportunities within the study area and open it up to questions or comments. And finally, we'll outline the next steps for the study. Next slide, please. And next slide. So as a bit of background on this effort, this is a conceptual planning study to evaluate the existing and future multimodal conditions at Wellington Circle. This process includes examining ways to redesign the circle to provide better connectivity and improve mobility within the city of Medford and the surrounding region. And based on the analysis and the feedback received over the course of the study, short, medium, and long-term recommendations will be developed and included in a draft final report that will be released for public comment, then finalized in a final report. Next slide, please. So kind of taking us back to where we were at our last meeting, we discussed the study's goals, and these are carried throughout the study process and really help guide the development of alternatives. The primary goals for this effort are to improve safety, mobility, and connectivity for all transportation modes and users in the Wellington Circle area, improve quality of life for residents, and improve local and regional connectivity to support economic development. Next slide, please. And in terms of the process itself, this chart outlines the study tasks, with each step building upon the previous one. And so the step highlighted in orange indicates where we are now. And as I mentioned, today we'll be discussing existing conditions and some of the current issues and opportunities. And we'll also begin thinking about what the future could look like. And of course, as trends continue to change as a result of the pandemic, that'll certainly play a role in the study process. And with that, I will hand it over to Natalie of our consultant team to talk more about the existing planning context. Natalie?
Thank you. So my name is Natalie Rafel. I'm on the project team, and I'm going to be giving an overview of the existing conditions and planning context. Next slide. So our first slide here shows the existing population density in the local study area. The local study area is defined by the blue shapes you see here. The range of blue colors represent different TAZs, or transportation analysis zones. And those are the geography that we use to look at the demographic data. So you can see here population density varies within the study area, with lower densities in the lighter shade of blue color and then higher densities in darker blue. So you can see within Wellington Circle itself, it's relatively low density. And this shows us that there is opportunity to identify areas for more transit-oriented development, especially given its proximity to the Orange Line station. And so this is a way that multimodal transportation options in the study area could be expanded. Next slide. And so we also looked at who makes up the local study area, since it's important to consider who we're planning for in this study. So we looked at several indicators, some of which are visualized here. In terms of race, we find that 36% of residents identify as non-white. In terms of language, 42% use a language other than English as their primary language. In terms of income, 12% of the population has an income below the poverty level. And then 14% of households are car-free, meaning these households do not own a personal vehicle. And so overall, we can see that the study area is pretty diverse. And so it's important to consider how we can use transportation improvements to mitigate the impacts of vehicular congestion, so things like air quality and emissions. Next slide. And so another demographic indicator we look at in regional transportation planning is environmental justice communities. And so this map shows geographically where those communities are located. And there's two indicators that make a community qualify as an environmental justice community. Those are minority and income. And so for a community to meet the minority criteria for environmental justice, that's where 28% or more of the population identifies as non-white. And areas that qualify under the low income criteria are where the household income is 60% or less of median household income. So as you can see here, to the east of Wellington Circle, those populations meet the minority only criteria. And there's only one TAS boundary to the south of Wellington Circle in Somerville that meets both criteria. So this map also shows us geographically where there are those car-free households that do not own a vehicle. And so here we're only mapping those that are where 25% or more of households do not own a vehicle. So you can see north of the circle, closer to Malden Center, there's a higher percentage, up to 68% of households don't own a vehicle. So again, it's important to consider all populations when looking at transportation as part of this study. And next slide. So now we're going to look at some projections between 2020 and 2040. So the first one is population change. And overall, we can see that there is projected to be some growth in population in the local study area, almost 7,000 new residents in this 20-year period. But as you can see, there is a very dark shape to the south of Assembly Square in Somerville, and that's accounting for a lot of this population growth. And then some of the growth is also occurring to the west of the circle along Mystic Valley Parkway. And so some of that is contributed to changes in development type and land use. So rather than there being overall a lot of more people in the study area, it's more so that some land uses are changing from more commercial based areas to residentially based. And if we go to the next slide, we can see when looking at employment change from 2020 to 2040, there's even a starker difference between areas that are growing and not growing. In Wellington Circle itself, we see no significant change in this time period in terms of number of employees, with the vast concentration of growth in Somerville and Everett. So this 30% growth in employment within this overall study area can largely be attributed to large-scale development projects near Assembly Square, development related to the Encore casino, and then also due to the Silver Line extension project. Next slide. Now here, looking at the existing land use in the study area, first of all, we can take away that there are a lot of different and diverse land uses that make up this area. But overall, it's relatively low density with a lot of single family and lower density multifamily housing. and then also a good number of low density commercial and light industrial spaces. So again, this shows that there is opportunity to densify the area and think about more mixed use development that can also help facilitate more trips to be made in shorter distances, which means more likely for people to walk and bike for these trip types. Next slide. And zoning tells a similar story where we see there are a range of different zones within the study area. Abutting Wellington Circle itself, we have residential uses, commercial, open space, industrial. So it's really important for us to think about the different types of land uses and development that the study area is serving and the need to accommodate both local and regional trips in this area. And next slide. And so our last slide in this section shows planned development, and this includes both proposed and actively under construction projects in the study area. So residential projects are shown here in green boxes, and then commercial projects are in purple. And so this kind of tells us the story behind some of the trends we saw earlier, where there's some new residential developments along Mystic Valley Parkway and Mystic Ave, which is contributing to some of that population growth. And then we have a concentration of commercial developments around Assembly Square that is leading to that employment growth. So if we go to the next slide, we're just going to pause here for a few minutes if there are any clarifying questions. There'll be time later in the presentation for more discussion. So this is just really focused on clarifying what was just presented. Not sure if anything has come in the chat that we would address right now. Let's see. Well, I don't see any working group members with raised hands, so we'll continue. We can go to the next slide. So now I'm going to give an overview of the multimodal transportation network. So next slide. We start off just by looking overall at the regional mode share for communities that are part of our study area. So you can see that the majority of people are driving alone to work for their commute, though in Somerville, this is roughly tied with the percentage of people using transit. So even with the drive alone percentage, the most popular in these or most used in these communities, if you take carpooling, transit, walking, and biking, so these sustainable modes of travel, if we group these all together, there's actually almost 50% of residents choosing one of these sustainable modes. And so I think this really demonstrates to us that there's opportunity to increase the mode share for sustainable modes even further with improvements in Wellington Circle that make it more convenient, safe, and comfortable for people to choose one of these more sustainable modes. Next slide. So we'll start off talking about walking conditions around Wellington Circle. And based on our existing conditions review, we found that the roadways leading towards Wellington Circle and comprising the circle itself do have sidewalks, but we know that sidewalks alone aren't enough to really create a comfortable walking environment that's safe for people of all ages and abilities. So despite there being sidewalks, there's still important barriers to a walkable environment that need to be considered in this area. Some of them are shown here. For example, on Revere Beach Parkway, the image to the bottom left on the screen shows a utility pole in the middle of the sidewalk, and this prohibits there being a 4-foot clear path of travel, which is required for ADA accessibility. To the north on the Fellsway, the image on the upper left shows there are multiple driveways along the Fellsway that break up the sidewalk network. And so these driveways also lead to there being more conflicts between pedestrians and turning vehicles. So that can create an uncomfortable and unsafe walking environment. And then on the north side of the Mystic Valley Parkway to the west of the circle, see in this photo that there are some poor pavement conditions. Things like cracking and uneven pavement also present safety issues and can just be uncomfortable for pedestrians. So we really need to think about walkability comprehensively and how it can be encouraged to make everyone feel safe and comfortable. Next slide. So when we take a closer look at Wellington Circle itself, we viewed looking at pedestrian facilities in the circle from the perspective of someone trying to cross from one end to the other, since it is an intersection. So here you can see a pedestrian icon to the top left of your screen near Wellington Circle Plaza. And so we thought about what it would take for this person to walk from this end to the other end at Station Landing towards Wellington Station. And so you can see on this graphic, no matter which way the person chooses to cross, it requires crossing through 5 to 6 legs of the intersection. And then in either direction, one leg requires crossing over 5 lanes of traffic. And so even though there's pedestrian signals and curb ramps and crosswalks, there's still the need for pedestrians to maintain a lot of patience, attention, and stamina to make it all the way from one way to the other. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see we did a comparison of what it would take to walk, or a comparison between if you walked directly through the circle, if you go one more slide forward, compared to these two designated routes. So to walk as the crow flies would take almost 2 minutes. And this is in comparison to the clockwise direction shown in light green, that would be almost 6 minutes. And the counterclockwise direction shown in dark green, that's roughly 5.5 minutes. And so knowing that pedestrians typically prefer to take the path of the most direct path and most convenient path, having this circuitous crossing pattern and having all the time waiting at signals and walking longer distances really does not promote a walkable environment. Next slide. So now we'll look at the existing bicycle network. And so we look at a slightly larger scale for this because people can typically bike further than they're willing to walk. And so what we take away from this graphic off the bat is that there actually are a fair number of existing bicycle facilities surrounding Wellington Circle, but that Wellington Circle itself is a gap in these regional networks. You can see Wellington Circle outlined in the red oval, but there are no bicycle facilities through the circle itself. But some of the existing facilities we have here are buffered bike lanes to the north on the Fellsway. There's dedicated bike lanes to the east on Revere Beach Parkway, off-street paths along Mystic Valley Parkway and through the reservation to the east and west, and then planned bike lanes on the Fellsway to the south. And so providing bike facilities through the circle really provides an opportunity to connect these more regional networks. And it will be important to consider how the bicycle facilities are provided and that they provide safety and comfort for people beyond those who feel comfortable riding adjacent to high-speed traffic and in multiple lanes of traffic, as that is what would be under the existing condition if just typical bike lanes were put in place. And next slide. So this map combines walking and biking demand by looking at a metric called the local access score. And the local access score measures a roadway segment's potential to serve walking and biking trips based on their proximity to amenities such as schools, shops, restaurants, transit, and parks. And so roadway segments that have a very high demand are shown in the darkest blue color. And so you can see roadways that lead into Wellington Circle and comprise the circle either have high or very high demand for walking and biking trips. And what this tells us is that if more facilities were put in place or better facilities were put in place, it's very likely that they would be highly utilized because there is this high demand. And next slide. So we also looked at the state's pedestrian and bicycle plans because it's important for this study to be consistent with established state planning goals and the vision of these plans to provide safe, comfortable, and convenient walking and biking facilities. So the goals are to improve safety by eliminating fatalities and serious injuries, and then also increase the percentage of trips taken by walking and biking. Next slide. And the bike plan in particular identifies Wellington Circle again as a gap in the state's high comfort bike network, which you can see on the image to the left, and then identifies it as an area that has high potential demand for everyday biking trips in the image on the right. So again, just looking at these so that our study can be consistent with established goals and identified issues. Next slide. So with all of that said, we now want to hear from you a bit on what your priorities are for walking and biking connections in this area. So we want you to think about areas that you would like to walk or bike, but are currently unable to due to lack of facilities, physical barriers, or feeling uncomfortable. So think of this beyond what the existing condition is today and where really your priorities are for making these connections. So if you go to the next slide, we have this map up that summarizes some of the existing pedestrian conditions, and different areas are labeled with numbers. And so when we launch the poll, we'll ask you to look at the numbers and tell us the top 2 areas that you would like to walk between most frequently. And so if we can get the poll up, yep. And if the poll is blocking your map, you can click the top of the pop-up box and move it over to the right. And so just look at the map, the numbers on the map, and then pick the top 2 that you would most frequently like to walk between in the answer choices. When it looks like enough people have responded, we can display the answers up on the screen. All right. So based on these answers, it looks like number 3, the Mystic State Reservation and Trail Network, had a lot of responses, followed by Wellington Station and Wegmans Plaza. And so, so 2, 3, and 7. So what we can do is, after this meeting, look at the polling results to correlate the answers with each other to understand more. There was a lot of interest in number 3, so understand more where the connections were with number 3, and we will release that following the meeting to provide more detail on that polling result. But that just gives us a sense of where the priorities are right now, which it looks like the State Reservation, Wegmans Plaza, and Wellington Station. And if we go to the next slide, this is a similar map, but focused on biking. And so again, we'll ask you to select the top 2 areas that you would most frequently like to bike between. If everyone's finishing up, we can release the results. So it looks like there's a lot of interest in Assembly Square as a biking destination. Then also north of Wellington Circle, number 2, and then Wellington Station again. So, it looks like telling us multimodal connections to Wellington Station are rising to the top in terms of improving walking and biking conditions there. And then it looks like for biking, maybe east, north-south connections to connect residents north of Wellington Station down to Assembly Square in Somerville. And then with walking, we also saw that east-west connection from Wegmans Plaza through the park to Wellington Station. So again, we'll look more closely at the results of the polling and put together a more detailed information on the numbers and how they match up in terms of origins and destinations following the meeting. So now I'm going to hand it off to Gary to continue on to talk about bus service in the local study area.
Good afternoon, and it's Gary McNaughton with McMahon Associates. With Natalie talking about the pedestrian and bicycle modes, I'm going to now spend a little bit of time talking about vehicle modes, starting with the bus service. So we've looked at, we've got IBI Group on board, looking at the bus service and the bus experience within the area, and looking at some of the metrics that are often used for assessing bus operation, a little bit different than typical vehicle operations. We have what you see on the right are really the 3 primary metrics that we're looking at: the travel time, quality of service, and again, that's on an A through F grading system. And it's really, how long is it taking me to get through and to complete my trip via bus? The variability, quality of service, how consistent is it? Is it 15 minutes every day, or is it 15 minutes one day, 45 minutes the next? And then taking that travel time information, weighting it by the number of people on the bus to get that excess passenger time compared to like a normal situation, not to free flow, but to a reasonable commute time. And what is that excess time that's factored into it? And using these 3 metrics to really evaluate how is the bus service working within our study area and around the station in particular. Next slide. So the routes coming into the station area and within our study area, you'll notice they all are serving Wellington Station. And correspondingly, 70% of the riders are boarding or alighting at Wellington Station. So that tells us within our project area, we have the opportunity and the potential to really enhance and improve the commutes for some of those bus riders coming through the area. Next slide. The other part of it we looked at is how are folks getting there? We don't want to just talk about buses, but how are folks getting to the station? And we've looked at how it's changed over time. And if you look at these 2 bar charts on the left portion of the slide, the one on the left being from the 2008-2009 survey information, and then the one on the right being from 2015-17, and you really see how it's transitioned. Bus ridership has increased significantly. The private vehicle driving to the station and parking has dropped off considerably. The other modes have stayed pretty consistent. The drop-off activity you see has stayed pretty consistent in terms of overall numbers, but it's shifted from private vehicles to rideshare. So you're definitely seeing some differing trends coming to the station, but that notable increase in bus access is really something to take that we're going to be taking into consideration as we look at opportunities through the project. Next slide. So we've tried to depict some of the operations for bus access to and from the station graphically. And I know this is a complicated slide, and all of this information will be available for you after, and some of it is geared for us to kind of give you an overview of how to understand it with the the opportunity to look at it later and really digest it. So the colors are talking about the travel time. Where is the trip slower? And then the line weight, whether it's a solid line or a dashed line, or dotted, is correlated to how variable that trip is. So a red, dotted line is going to be your worst case scenario, green solid line being really consistent, fairly quick trip. And when you look at this graphic, and this is for inbound bus trips to the station, you'll notice that the delays are really between the circles. And it's kind of a common theme that we're seeing between Wellington Circle and Sweetser Circle. You're seeing significant delays and variability in those trips, and that's where there may be opportunities to enhance some of that service and improve that experience for those bus riders. When we look at the similar information, next slide, for the outbound trips, you're seeing the same theme of delays between the circles, both, delays and variability in those trips between the circles. They get a little bit better as you start to get outside of that area within the study area that we're looking at. Next slide. And when you look at the excess passenger time, which again, this is compared back to what a normal, commute would be, not a level of service A, but something in the level of service C range, on how much worse is it than that. And where you're seeing those reds and orange, that's where you're seeing those excess passenger delays. Buses are crowded and buses are going slow and getting caught up in traffic. They're mixed in with everybody else through these roadways, with the exception of some recent improvements out at Sweetser Circle. So, they are experiencing all of those same delays, and you're seeing it again between the two circles where there's some opportunities to make some improvements. Next slide. I know I ran through that kind of quick, and we had a couple of questions for you at this point, similar to what Natalie was doing. And we want you to think not just about how you're doing it today, but if the facilities were there, what would be your preferred mode to get to Wellington Station? And then think about, how is it today? How easy, comfortable is it for me to do it via that mode today? Do you want to bring up the poll? So again, thinking, how would I like to, if it was a comfortable trip, and then how would that experience be if I tried to do it today? Two-part question. Eric, I can't see the number of respondents, so I'm gonna have to rely on you to switch over at the appropriate time. All right, so we are seeing, 60% almost prefer to walk or bike. And I'm going to guess that is, without scrolling down, I probably knew that was going to be in the difficult range, with some neutral. So we'll again be looking at matching, after we can dig in a little bit deeper and match up the modes to the level of difficulty to start to see this. But I don't think it's any surprise that trying to walk and bike to the station is definitely challenging under the existing conditions, and something we've heard repeatedly. Next slide. Next slide. All right, so then we still have the traditional looking at the intersection, looking at the overall operations, looking at vehicle experience going through these locations. And we've got a total of 13 intersections within the study area that we're looking at in close detail. 5 of those are signalized intersections that are shown in the blue, and 8 of them are unsignalized that are shown in the orange. Next slide. So doing studies under current circumstances has been a challenge over the past year plus at this point. We're getting started on this project and the world changed rather abruptly. So we've had to make a concerted effort on trying to identify appropriate traffic volumes for various projects and studies that we've been doing. And with this one being no different. Fortunately, we had a good number of data points from prior studies and recent work that had been done out there. And we've compiled all of that data, and it's shown graphically on this slide, the different sources by colors that you can see. And we've compiled all of that information, assembled it in, and normalized it to try to get as close to a 2019 pre-pandemic condition as we could. And fortunately, the Encore casino monitoring had occurred just prior to the impact of COVID back in February of 2020. We also had some other data that was done for the Route 1 viaduct construction. So we have a pretty good base set that we've been able to build off, and we've adjusted those so that we have a balanced set that's consistent between intersections. And we're using that to reflect the typical pre-pandemic experience. Post-pandemic, we're still working on how things are going to look post-pandemic. I guess we'll know a little bit more come next week as things start to return, but it's going to take time for those traffic volumes and travel patterns to settle out. And I think we're going to see some long-term lasting effects. So, the future scenario, again, is something we're still working on, but we're starting with this baseline of the pre-pandemic 2019. And we went through quite an effort to get to that point. It honestly would have been easier just to be able to go out there and count the number of cars as we historically had done. Next slide. So, and these are going to be ones that, I'd encourage you to go back and look at on your own later. We have traffic volume figures that show the number of vehicles, bikes, pedestrians going through each of those study area intersection. Click next slide. When you look at them closer, you'll see the numbers in black with the arrows corresponding to the vehicle moves going through the various intersections. The number of bicycles shown in green with directionality of how they're traveling through the intersection. You'll notice there's not a high number of bicycles going through these intersections for obvious reasons, given the lack of facilities. And then you'll have the number of pedestrian crossings just shown in the middle on these figures, and just the total number of pedestrians is illustrated on these figures. And this is the weekday morning peak hour. Next slide is the weekday PM peak hour. And this is mostly included for you to go back and look at the presentation on your own later. You click next slide. So we also have broken down the pedestrian volumes much further beyond just the total number that's shown in those larger vehicle movement slides. We do have the number of pedestrians, the location where they're crossing, the directionality where we had it. Some of the information that's shown in orange is where we've tried to estimate some of the directionality, where we didn't have specific information to it. So that is all broken down. Again, this is AM peak hour. Next slide. And then for the PM peak hour, we have the same corresponding information. So again, you can go back. Don't expect you to digest it quickly on screen here, but you can go back at that and look at that information on your own later. Next slide. So when we try to step back and, the circle, when you looked at those vehicle movement diagrams, they're pretty confusing, particularly if you look at the circle itself. There's so many different connections that a vehicle coming just from the east trying to go south shows up at a few different stop lines through the intersection. So we've tried to kind of boil it down to what are the movements that are happening? Where are people going through the circle? And this graphic represents the weekday morning peak hour. And what can we draw from those patterns that we see? And you're seeing in the morning peak hour, you're not seeing a significant number of left turns. Those left turning volumes are pretty low, and all of these lines are weighted to the volume. The southbound movements are predominantly through. You are seeing some move going off to the east, but it's predominantly through movements for those southbound movements. The northbound movement is heavy, almost 85% of it going off to the east. So you're seeing a big number of it going off to the east. And then similarly, the traffic from the east, you're seeing almost half of it going to the south. And that's a recurring pattern with that south and east connection that's happening through the study area. You're also seeing the heaviest movement entering the intersection is that westbound move in the morning peak hour. Next slide. When we look at the PM, you see some of the same patterns, but you're seeing a much greater dispersion of volumes. Those left turn volumes have all started to go up a fair amount, so you have a little bit more diversity in the number of movements that are happening here. Your northbound still has a heavy right turn volume, but there is a little more dispersion into the other directions. And you're still seeing that heavy westbound movement. That's still one of your heaviest movements entering into the intersection, and still slightly heavier than northbound, even in the afternoon peak hour. Next slide. When we look at them side by side, you don't see some of the typical commuter patterns that you would expect. That east-west movement, westbound is always higher than eastbound. And normally you're going to see that reverse from morning to afternoon peak hour, and we're just not seeing that. You're seeing consistently heavier westbound volumes. When you look at the roadways overall within the study area, that section to the east of the circle, where I talked about on the bus information, between the circles being the most congested area, And you're seeing that in these graphics where that leg to the east of the circle is where you're seeing the heaviest volumes. Next slide. The other factor that we're looking at is safety and crash history that's happening throughout the study area. And these diagrams are shown trying to give a little bit of a graphical representation for what can be very technical and detailed information. So the size of the circles are generally proportional to the number of crashes, not directly. But obviously the bigger the circle, the greater the number of crashes. And then the individual colors match up to the type of crash. Next slide. So you can see, just looking at this one intersection as an example, you'll see there were 4 pedestrian crashes reported, 32 total crashes, and then the colors broken down by the type of crash. And you're seeing, the individuals. So you're seeing 4 head-on crashes, 5 sideswipe crashes, etc. Through that. So again, you can go through these on your own. I'll draw some broad conclusions from them if you go to the next slide. We have a similar graphic of the intersections that comprise Wellington Circle itself. And you're not seeing a large number of bicycle crashes, at any of the study area intersections, really due to the low number of bicycles. But you're seeing a significant number of crashes overall, 278 crashes over a 3-year period, close to 100 per year that you're seeing. But again, not typical patterns of what we'd expect to see at a signalized intersection. Traditionally, it's a large number of rear end crashes. Here we're seeing a much greater number of angle crashes shown in orange, or the sideswipe crashes shown in blue, which is really derived from the number of lanes that we have, the turning patterns that we have through here. Confusion as vehicles try to change lanes last minute, etc. We did have 1 fatality within the circle itself. And you'll notice almost every intersection has a pedestrian crash at least. They're not high numbers, but pedestrians are, exposed at every one of these intersections and experiencing crashes throughout the study area. Next slide. So when we start to look at the analysis results, you're seeing, and this represents your traditional level of service. I may have talked earlier about how we're not just going to rely on level of service, but we are going to report it. We are going to run analysis that measures levels of service. But what you'll notice, some of these locations show up as green and yellow levels of service B and C that don't correlate to your experience going through those intersections. Even some of the Ds that you're seeing, those intersections don't operate as level of service D because of the interaction. These intersections are closely spaced. They're going to be interacting with each other. And then queuing is going to interact from one intersection to the next. Next slide. And when you look at the queuing, what we've highlighted here, we've shown graphically the average queues, the 50th percentile queues in yellow, and then your 90th percentile queues in orange. And then those shown in red are where those queues are exceeding the available storage lane length within that intersection. And that's where you're really going to see problems as they spill back through the adjacent intersection, start to create those gridlock situations. And that's where actual operations are going to be worse than what we're seeing from the analysis results. And that's where we'll be digging in as we get into future scenarios. We'll be digging a little deeper to make sure that we have a clear understanding of how those locations are actually operating. And this represents the morning peak hour. If you click the next slide, you'll see in the afternoon peak hour, overall queues have gotten a little bit longer. You're still seeing queues extending beyond the available storage, starting to spill into adjacent intersections, creating those gridlock situations, but in different locations than you're seeing in the morning peak hour. Next slide. So the other thing that we want to know is not just, how many cars are going through here, but where are they going? Where are they coming from? Where are they going to? And fortunately, we have the availability of new data sources over the recent years. This location-based service data pulled from GPS systems, cell phone data. It's all anonymized. We can't tell you exactly who went through the circle and through the study area roadways, but we can certainly identify, where they were generally coming from with a reasonable degree of accuracy. We don't get down to the street level. Like I said, it's anonymized, but we have a good understanding of where folks are going to. And who's traveling through the area. All of this data is from 2019, before the COVID impact, so that we have a more traditional, typical data set. We looked at 3 specific locations within the study area to identify how folks are traveling that I'll be talking about between Wellington Circle, Wellington Station, and the Encore Casino. Next slide. So when we look at the data and we start to look at who's travel, how are the trips that are going through the circle, where are they coming from, how are they happening? And most of them are local. It's 60% of them in the morning peak hour that are originating locally, and we're defining local as the adjacent communities within the study area. So those local trips don't have a lot of flexibility in terms of being able to take a different route necessarily, but they may have more flexibility in terms of using other modes. When we look at the overall pass-through, that cut-through traffic, regional traffic that's just cutting through the area, we're not seeing a huge number. In the morning peak hour, it's about 19% of the overall volume going through the circle, or more regional folks driving to destinations outside of the local area. Next slide. When we look at the weekday PM, you're seeing similar patterns, but even greater of a shift towards the local trips, with 64% having local destinations for those folks traveling into the study area, and only about 13.5% that are that cut through traffic that may have the ability to choose another route. Most of them are that local trip that really don't have a lot of flexibility in their routes, and folks that, again, we may be able to shift to other modes if we can make some enhancements in those areas. Next slide. So looking at that graphically, what does that mean? Where are they actually coming from? And the size of these circles represent where the number of trips are coming from. On the left is the origins for folks traveling through Wellington Circle, and then on the right is their destination. So when you look at the origins, the majority of the people traveling through the circle in the morning peak hour, they're from the north and slightly to the east of the circle. And again, follows along with some of those volume figures and patterns that we were seeing. Their destinations, a large number of them are local, as shown in those orange dots right around the area. And then another concentration that you're seeing in the downtown core, the Cambridge areas as well. Next slide. And then just depicting it in a slightly different graphic format. When you're looking at the morning peak hour southbound into the circle, good chunk of them to the north and the east, the next big proportion to the north and the west, and then where they're dispersing to, into Boston, Cambridge, and Somerville, and seeing how those folks are traveling through the area. In the evening when they're, the northbound trip, in the morning, where they're coming from and where they're going out to, being primarily Medford, Malden, and Everett. Next slide. So then when we look at the home locations for those folks that are traveling into the Wellington Station area, and you have Wellington Station on the left and the Encore Casino on the right. So when you look at the Wellington Station area, you're seeing a lot of local trips north and to the north and to the east in the surrounding communities heading to the station. And these, I want to point out, these maps are not to the same scale. So the one for the Encore is zoomed out a little bit further. So don't be fooled by that. When you look at the Encore Casino, you do see a good concentration in the local area. That's likely employees and others that are frequenting the casino, but you do see a greater dispersion. But it was interesting that you still have the majority of the trips happening within the 128 belt. It's not drawing high numbers from outside that area, at least not the majority of its trips. And you are seeing that skew to the north and to the east of the casino, as you'd expect. It's probably a little bit more convenient to get there from that direction than trying to come up through the city. Next slide. And we will look at the travel times for those facilities. Not surprisingly, Wellington Station mirrors your typical commuter peak times. Your AM and PM peaks is when that facility is seeing the greatest number of trips. The casino, doesn't. It's shifting and growing over the course of the day and peaking later in the evening and continuing with higher volumes later into the evening. Again, not surprising given the type of land use that we're looking at. Next slide. So when we look at the overall stats for the trips to those destinations, as I said, Wellington Station has a distinct service area of communities that it's serving. It's defined clear peaks following your typical commuter trips, but some outside of those, some midday trips. The Encore, does draw some clusters in the local area. Like I said, likely to be a number of their employees. Greater demand from the northern suburbs, and certainly, primarily within the 128 belt, and increasing over the course of the day, as you'd expect, the evening activity being greater for the casino. Next slide. So I went through a lot of information there. In what I presented, does that analysis, does the results match your experience? Does that match what you see in terms of operations? Is the greatest delay between the two circles? The safety numbers, high number of crashes at the circle. Is that, consistent with what you experience? Thinking about it pre-pandemic versus today, again, everything that we're looking at was pre-pandemic, so keep that in mind. And then, do the origin and destinations, the travel patterns that I talked about, do those match what you think of as when you're thinking about folks traveling through the area? Was it a little more local than you thought, or, is it consistent with what you were thinking? So the poll question should be on your screen now. Again, Eric, I'll defer to you on terms of number of respondents and when to move along.
Waiting for a couple more responses.
Okay, thanks. I know we're throwing poll questions at you. There's plenty of other opportunities for input, outside of this format. That's good. We did pretty well in terms of representing what you saw. Good. Those are the results we hope for. Those of you that responded not well and way off, I'd encourage you to provide further input outside of this. There's certainly going to be follow-up opportunities for input, and by all means, provide that information to us. That's the point of this group and these meetings, is for us to hear from you. In virtual settings, we're doing our best, but certainly outside of this, look for those opportunities to provide that information to us. Next slide. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Joanne to talk a little bit more about some of the issues, constraints, and opportunities. Joanne.
Okay. I'm Joanne Harris with McMahon Associates, and I'm going to try to summary of what we've identified through our existing conditions analysis. And then after this, Michaela will open it up for a working group discussion. So next slide, please. So the issues that we've identified, as Gary mentioned, we've identified crashes involving a pedestrian at most of the circle intersections. So we know safety is an issue, and multimodal connectivity is a big issue. It's both limited by the wide roadways, the multiple lanes of traffic, as well as the lack of accommodations. So all of this contributes to the circle serving as a barrier to local destinations, and including Wellington Station. And then both from the traffic and the transit perspective, we see that vehicle congestion is worse east of the circle. And that creates problems for both, as I said, private vehicles and buses. Next slide, please. So we want to also look at some of the physical constraints and the environmental issues that we see around here, because that will help inform what we're looking at in terms of alternatives. So the roadways, one issue is that the roadways comprising Wellington Circle are parkways, and they're under historic designation. And we also have the Mystic River Reservation of the park itself. So these are considerations we'll have to take in mind. Now, this doesn't mean that we can't do anything with Wellington Circle, but that as we go forward, the alternatives will have to consider the process for review for these types of facilities. We have some natural resource features, as I mentioned. The Mystic River Reservation has some waterways along the Fellsway. Keep that in mind, as well as some of the trees and landscaping. We also need to consider who owns the road. In this case, the jurisdiction is MassDOT for most of the roadways, except for the Fellsway north of the circle, in which case that's under DCR, or Department of Conservation and Recreation. So we'll have to take into account that there's multiple jurisdictions for roadway improvements. Another feature we want to consider is utilities. There's a number of large utilities in and around the circle. We've noted those in our initial analysis, and so we'll have to keep those in mind as we develop alternatives. And then as we move forward with the alternatives development process, we'll also look at the analysis. We'll analyze each of those alternatives in terms of what potential impacts they may have to natural elements. So this is all part of looking at the big picture and developing alternatives within the planning context of Wellington Circle itself. Next one, please. But also, there's also opportunities present here. Those wide roadways that are barriers also provide opportunities for allocating some of that space to other uses for the pedestrians, bicyclists, or transit. So we're going to keep those, and we'll keep that in mind as we go together. There's opportunities for connections. There's existing trails through Mystic River Reservation, and we've heard that a lot of people, that's a destination for a lot of people. So we'll keep that in mind as we develop alternatives. And beyond the physical roadway, there's also opportunities for land use improvements to have mixed use, increasing population density, all the types of land uses that encourage walking and biking and transit use. So we'll look at the bigger picture, not just the physical improvements to the roadway itself. And next slide, please. So this project, as many of you are aware, is part of a larger package of mitigation commitments by the Encore Casino. There are some that already have been underway, Scintillary Circle improvements for flow and pedestrian, same thing at Sweetser Circle. There's been a bike ped bridge design to the casino, as well as a variety of infrastructure and travel demand management services such as water, transportation, shuttle buses, Orange Line service improvements. So this project is being considered in the context of the larger package of improvements that are occurring as part of the mitigation for the casino. Next slide, please. So as Michaela mentioned at the beginning, the goals and objectives are really what help inform the alternatives development, as well as our understanding of what the key issues are. So just as a refresher, we have mobility and access goals related to traffic congestion, facilities for bikes and pedestrians, and then also improving connectivity to Wellington Circle. There is goals for safety in terms of reducing speeds, conflict points between modes, and providing dedicated space for pedestrians and bicyclists. Quality of life, we want to make this an attractive place, improve public health, minimize environmental impacts, and provide fair and equitable treatment for the EJ populations, of which there are a number in this area. And then connectivity, reducing travel delays, access and circulation, and promoting active transportation. So as we go through alternatives development, we'll keep all these goals and objectives in mind as we develop them in the next steps. Next slide, please. So there's a number of key takeaways. So we still no one really knows the long-term effects on COVID patterns. We've looked at traffic and before and after, with information that was collected before COVID. Well, we're going to consider a number of scenarios so we can test things as we go forward. It'll be less traffic, more traffic. We'll be able to test those through scenarios and see what works in those situations. We know that safety, again, multimodal connectivity and accommodations and vehicle congestions are key issues in the study area with regards to the transportation network. And then we need to take into account other constraints. As I said, the parkways are under historic designation, and there are other natural elements there, waterways, mature trees. We'll keep those in mind as we go forward. And we've identified some initial opportunities, and the next step really is to hear from the group to see what other opportunities might be out there. But as I said, the wide roadways provide space for multimodal facilities. Land use, changing mixed use increases opportunity for short trips to be taken by walking and biking. And together, all these safety and connectivity improvements can also help reduce congestion, improve public health, and just improve the overall multimodal experience for active transportation within the area. So with that summary, I'm going to turn this back to Michaela to lead a discussion with the working group on these issues.
Thanks, Joanne. So at this point, like Joanne mentioned, I'd like to open it up to discussion and more conversation about issues and opportunities. And so to get us started with the discussion, an interactive map was developed to begin kind of gathering some of this feedback. And as the map kind of loads, this map really allows commenters to enter in issues, opportunities, general comments at specific areas within the circle and within the area itself. And so some of the opportunities identified relate to establishing desire lines for walking, for example, from Station Landing to Fellsway Plaza and Station Landing to McDonald Park, and those desire lines really needing to be a primary focus. And some of the other comments highlighted some of the recent development in the area and improvements along the Malden River that provide better pedestrian connectivity. And we also heard about some issues as well at President's Landing and the right turn lanes at the circle that really see cars flying through the area, which certainly has impacts on safety of bicyclists and pedestrians. And so that was a little bit of a primer about for the discussion. And at this point, I'd like to open the floor to members of the working group to share their thoughts on the existing issues and opportunities that you've seen or experienced and heard about, and get your thoughts on those, that have been presented today, as well as any others that should be considered. We really rely on your expertise and your local knowledge to guide us and to guide this process. So please, we certainly want to know your thoughts. So with that, I'll throw it to Erica.
Thanks, Michaela. So we already have a couple of questions that we'll go through. So we'll start here with a question and comment from Jeff Boxham from Walk Medford. And this is on the poll. So he mentioned that this is a pretty small sample. It's hard to take much away from this, and that it isn't really a bike between, but rather origins and destinations. So I think I'm going to turn that over to Natalie to answer.
Yep, thanks. Yeah, I mean, we recognize that this is a small sample size just in this meeting. So we are looking at the results of the polling in conjunction with other information that we've looked at in terms of desire lines, and the map being shared on the screen here too is an opportunity for you to submit more information on places you'd like to be able to more easily walk and bike between. You can submit other comments on the project website to describe other areas. And ultimately, we'll look at everything to kind of see the trends that emerge. And like I said before, we will be able to look at the results of the polling in more detail after the meeting and better connect the numbered responses that go together to see those areas of where the links between which numbers would correlate with each other.
Great. So this next question, and Wendy, I see you have two questions here, so we'll start with the first one, and this will be for Gary. So NACTO recommends using a walking speed of 2.5 to 3.5 feet per second for signal timing. The analysis that you showed used a speed of 4 feet per second. With a slower speed, it would actually take even longer to get across the intersection. Can you please discuss what timing you will use to do the analysis of the design options? Thank you.
Yeah, and we used the 4 seconds just so we weren't, we didn't want to overstate and be accused of, cooking the books on the walk time. So we just used the 4 second just for the purpose of that graphic to give an illustration of how much it increases when you start to take those other routes. And again, we didn't want to overstate that, but certainly we'll be using at most 3.5 feet per second in terms of any analysis of alternatives or signal analysis. We may go a little bit lower. I know there's been some instances where we've gone down to 3 seconds. I haven't seen a lot go to as low as 2.5, but we'll start to work through that as we look at alternatives. We'll be looking at it, whether or not we go any lower than that, depending on the number of pedestrians and the types of users that we're looking at.
Great. And I see another question here from Wendy. You guys can use the Q&A chat box if you have any others, or raise your hand. So this, again, from Wendy, thanks. Have you considered how many trips might shift to walking, transit, and biking if the area worked better / more safely for those modes? wondering whether those shifts could offset some possible road diets. And I think that'll be also for Gary.
Yep, and Wendy, that's exactly where we're going with it. That's why we were gathering all of that data about who's traveling through the area, how far are they traveling, so that as we start to develop alternatives, we want to know how many trips are potentials to be converted over to walking or biking or transit bus trips accessing the station. So that's definitely something in the next stage as we start to look at alternatives in future scenarios that we will be considering. And that's why we gathered all this existing condition information.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Gary. And so there's another question, but before we get to that, just a reminder to working group members to please raise your hand if you have any thoughts that you'd like to share verbally in addition to the Q&A. So there is a comment here from from Peter about closed captions for the meeting. So we will be uploading an accessible document after the meeting on the website. Okay.
I see a comment from one of our working group members in the chat from Bill Carlson.
Yep, so Bill said that he discourages use of 9th Street and Brainerd Ave as a way to bypass the circle. Those two streets are local roads.
And we've heard that a lot. And ideally we can solve some of the problems and make it so that folks don't need to bypass into the local streets, but that's certainly something we're going to be considering and sensitive to as we look at options and making sure that we aren't diverting people and that we can discourage what's already going on today.
I see Alicia maybe raising an actual hand and a virtual hand. So go ahead.
Hi. Thank you for doing this. We've gotten the habit of doing both because some facilitators see virtual versus real better than the others. One of the things that I've seen raised, and we've been having some discussions around the City of Medford, I'm the Director of Planning and Sustainability, is around dedicated bus lanes and taking from traffic lanes, and just conceptually that it makes it easier, better bus service. Maybe more people will move to bus service, but taking a traffic lane from an already very congested location such as this for dedicated bus and then mushing more cars together, for lack of a better term, can be very problematic. And I'm wondering if that sort of stuff is something that you're talking about or being considered here. I mean, I both see we saw very obviously that there's a problem with bus service, and I assume that problem is road congestion. So it's a problem for the people in cars too, who are trying to get to one of those destinations, Wellington Station, and in some cases to get on the bus. So I just thought it would be maybe helpful to talk about that a little bit and sort of in a conceptual way, and whether that's being considered here at all.
And I can tell you the short answer is yes, it's being considered, but not in a vacuum. We're not looking to take the existing roadway configuration and just take away a lane. I know a lot of the bus lane work, and we've done a lot of the bus lanes that have been implemented around by the MBTA. That is, kind of quick implementation, trying to fit it within the existing infrastructure. As we look at alternatives and concepts for this area, we will consider opportunities for improving bus service, whether it's through, dedicated lanes or, queue jumps at signals, things that can improve it will be part of our toolbox. But like I said, I don't envision, just trying to put a bus lane onto the existing roadway network without any other changes as part of our concept plans.
Thank you. It's helpful to understand what you're thinking.
Okay, and I think next I see Jeff has his hand raised, and then Todd Blake. So we'll go over to Jeff first.
Thanks. There's a real thorough investigation of a difficult space, so thank you very much, guys. You mentioned a couple times the historic designation there. Can you give a sense of what the constraints of that will be as you look at alternatives?
This is Joanne Harris. I can answer the question. It means that we'll have to go through a review process with the consulting parties on this issue. That will include the State Historic Preservation Officer, Mass Historic Commission, and things of that sort. However, since this has been used as transportation infrastructure historically and has been modified over the years, the circle itself was not the original configuration. It was added in the 1930s. So it's something we'll have to consider, but it's not going to preclude us from moving forward with some alternatives.
Good, thank you.
Thanks, Jess. So I don't see Todd anymore, so please re-raise your hand if you want to speak, but I do see Amber, so you can go ahead and unmute.
Yeah, hi, my name is Amber. I'm with the Mystic River Watershed Association. My question isn't really specifically about what you plan to design here, but more, I think I have a hard time thinking how this area is going to be flipped from dominated by cars to being good for people walking and biking. Like, I'm not a transportation planner, so I'm glad you guys are looking at this, but I'm like, what comes to mind for me is, have you all seen examples of a roadway similar to this that went through a transformation and was able to achieve those multi-mobility goals? Like, I think it'd be really interesting to see if there are case studies out there, and maybe you're already looking at this or this is the next step. But I'd love to like see something that really happened to get me able to conceptualize how this might happen, even in the long term.
So I'll jump in. So I don't think there is another intersection in the world that is quite configured like this one. So
No, that's the problem, is like, what is the precedent? But
yeah, so what we're really looking at is ways that we can improve the efficiency. And this was an intersection that was cobbled together, and you can kind of see how it was Band-Aid after Band-Aid to get to the way that it is today, which is really not a very efficient configuration for the roadways. We did a lot of the work on the Casey Arborway project, and although it's not a direct analogy because that one had a bridge, it had a lot of inefficiencies on the surface network. And when we started looking at that, everybody was like, wait, there's no way you can put all that traffic at the surface and make it work, because they were envisioning the existing very inefficient surface network. If you kind of take this and look at it with a blank slate and say, okay, what can we do to connect these roadways that are running through the circle in a much more efficient manner? That's really what we're going to be trying to look at and see, is there a way that we can make these various modes coexist in a more efficient manner so that it works better, for everybody? Can we, to Wendy's question, shift some of the trips that are happening over to other modes? And, some of that will happen just if you make it more attractive and more comfortable. Folks will choose those other modes to some degree. And if we can, make transit service more efficient to the station, that hopefully would shift some as well. So it's going to be a combination of all those efforts.
yeah, and I assume that there are some limits to how big we can dream, because I've heard people recommend putting in infrastructure that they see in the Netherlands, where it's like a floating walking and biking circle, and like people are like, wouldn't that be great? And I don't know if that's in the bounds of this study, but
yeah, we are looking at grade separated alternatives. In my personal experience, trying to grade separate, to put pedestrians and bicyclists above,
yeah, that's hard.
it's challenging to get them to use it. And, unless there's no choice, it's a physical barrier in between it. A lot of times what you'll see is they'll continue to stay at grade. Just, going upstairs is hard. So I don't know that would fit here. I think the areas where that fit, the topography may lend itself to it a little bit better. Where folks don't have that feeling of going up to go across to go down. So we'll see where the concept development takes us.
Thanks.
Thanks, Amber. So I see Todd Blake now, if you want to go ahead and unmute.
Yeah, thanks everyone. It's a good discussion, and to get to some of the points by Alicia, Amber, Gary, it seems like, yeah, we got to walk that fine line between, thinking, not displacing other modes, but thinking of ways to incorporate these in a much better way than exists today. And the opportunity I see here is, unlike a lot of major intersections, which have right-of-way problems, the approaches here may have right-of-way constraints, but the intersection in the center itself, the oval itself, has a lot of right-of-way to work with, potentially to think of it as a blank slate and reconfigure some things, which may provide sections of opportunities for short queue jumps for buses or something of that nature. And then I would like to keep that grade separate option open to some extent, because there is a challenge with getting folks to use it, but at the same time, that graphic with the diagonal across as the crow flies type thing, if it were separate, you wouldn't have any delay and it would be a direct connection. So yeah, the places in Boston that seems to work is Storrow Drive. I think there's 5 or 6 ped crossings, and yeah, obviously, as Gary mentioned, physically it's prevented by walls and fences. So at an intersection, it's a little more challenging to do it, but that, even in major metropolitan areas like in Europe, not necessarily the grade separation piece of it, but you could use tactics that funnel pedestrians to particular either grade separated crossing or an at grade crossing, and prevent the ability to use these optional routes. So that it does seem like we have some opportunities here. And I hope we could still consider some of those, because going up is a challenge, but it may be worth the trade-off of not crossing 17 lanes of traffic. So, and the other opportunity here, I think, is over time with Medford's zoning, looking ahead, with 3 of the 4 corners, kind of development type corners, not suggesting that this is Las Vegas, but in areas like that, they have pedestrian overpasses that connect into buildings at the second floor potentially, and things like that. Not that will happen here, but just to think of some of those outside the box. I know the trend these days is grounding everything and not grade separating, but there may be good reasons to do a combination of those potentially.
Yeah. And it's not off the table. I don't know that we can do the escalators that they do in Vegas, though. That might be a problem.
But even like grade separation, you could get into environmental issues as well, because you have to meet grades at the river to go over or under certain things. So even if it's if vehicles were depressed a little bit and pedestrians are raised a little bit, you could kind of even consider half and half. But then, you got to weigh that against the barrier, the visual barrier and things like that. But there could be opportunity to do something other than the straight graphic that you showed with crossing, 5 or 6 legs at a time, 17 lanes.
Yeah, we're hoping we can improve upon that.
Thanks.
So I see, thanks, Todd. So I see Jeff with his hand up, and just a reminder before you move into the public comment, if any other members of the working group would like to speak, to please raise your hand. And Jeff, over to you.
So while we're talking about grade separations, are grade separations of the vehicle traffic being considered? For example, bringing either Route 16 or 28 down underneath? I mean, the idea that, you're going to lose, if you take the pedestrians up and over, it's going to take the same amount of time, because you got to get up and you got to get down. So we're not gaining a lot of time. You're not really going as the crow flies. And I really think there's a ton of demand. It's just getting across all those lanes is tough. So if we could get one of those directions of traffic, vehicle traffic down, I don't want to say up, but down, is that even on the radar? I don't know. Is there a budget constraint on this planning exercise at this point? Are we constrained by our thinking in that way?
I can speak to our scope, not necessarily the budget constraint on alternatives, but our scope does include looking at grade separated concepts and alternatives. Combination of up or down. Down tends to get more expensive from a construction side, so that may start to come into play as we evaluate the alternatives and consider what comes out as the preferred alternatives. But the budget becomes a consideration in correlation to the benefits of them. So you do end up considering it, but we will be looking at grade separation. Looking at those traffic volumes, the most likely, if you're going to separate vehicles, is to connect Route 16 straight through on, whether it's above or below. But we'll see, as we start to dig into that a little bit deeper. We really try to stay away from developing concepts until we've gotten past this stage and we've heard from everybody in a couple of different opportunities.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. I see Todd. Go ahead.
Yeah, Jeff, I'm glad you mentioned the vehicles. I didn't mean to exclude that. That should be on the table 16 or 28. And that's kind of where it's getting at with the expense of going down, but also not wanting pedestrian staff to do the full amount. If vehicles went down somewhat and pedestrians went up a little bit, they split the difference. But so yeah, another opportunity, because like I said, with the right of way in the center here, there may be the opportunity. There didn't look like a lot of left turns except that westbound left to southbound move. And there may be the opportunity to do a jug handle type situation where it becomes a through southbound, right turn westbound to a through southbound versus a straight left. Not knowing, looking what that would look like or how much space it would eat up, but it seems like, in other areas you don't have that option. It may be an option if things were tweaked here to consider. Because lefts, as we all know, are a problem for traffic intersections.
Yeah, lefts are bad. Try to get rid of them.
Great. Looks like we have another comment here from working group member Bill Carlson. So the comment is Boston Central Artery and Worcester 1-290 are I-290, sorry, are two examples of why it is a bad idea to separate halves of a neighborhood with an elevated road.
There's probably some other examples, and we made a lot of that argument in the Casey project. In the debate becomes, what's a greater separator, a elevated roadway or an at-grade roadway that's a barrier? And those are the things we'll be considering. If we start to look at anything elevated, or grade separated, you really need to look at how that's designed. What are the treatments that you're doing? You don't want it to be an area that, if you're not a troll, you'd never want to go under that bridge. You want to make sure that it's inviting and something that's comfortable to cross under if we end up with something above. So good points.
Alicia?
So actually, just to sort of add on to that, to help, I think that to have some perspective of this, here in Medford, I've actually heard people, and in particular, I'm hearing the voice of our former longtime mayor was really in favor of grade separated here. And I've never really dug at particularly why, because I have been hearing recently, there's still a lot of pain in the city of Medford from I-93 coming through. And there's been a lot of discussion at the federal level of sort of restitution around federal highways that have destroyed neighborhoods. And I think there's a lot of equity in that. And it's actually caused people in Medford to talk about how that caused a lot of pain when 93 came through here and destroyed neighborhoods. And obviously any grade separation here is not going to destroy neighborhoods. But people are still talking about that today. And we have a section of Route 16 that's elevated just south of Medford Square. And I frequently hear people talk about, wouldn't it be great to bring that down to grade level? And I kind of wonder why, because I do think that would actually make that intersection worse. But it's something, people don't like underpasses. They don't like walking under them, as I'm sure you guys know. But I think it may be helpful for you to know that while we have these in Medford, we still hear people talk about how horrible they were when they were built.
Yeah, and it's controversial anytime you're talking about, grade separated structures, that under bridge environment, and if I used to walk under the Central Artery in Boston all the time. It was really uncomfortable. And a lot of the other ones can be that same experience. Bringing them down can work in the right circumstances. So, I don't know where we're going to end up with in terms of concepts. We'll be looking at grade separate, and all of those factors come into play because they certainly bring out some emotions on both sides. There's some folks that think they're great and, keep the traffic flowing. That's the primary concern. And others that, live close to them, experience that underbridge environment and all that goes along with it are less in favor of them. So.
And don't get me wrong, I think it would be brilliant if people could just walk straight across that intersection and save that much time. I do think that would be brilliant. It's just something to be, I suspect there are also better ways of doing it than there were back then, than what we had back then.
Yep.
Jeff, have you up next?
Yeah, just to be clear, I was talking about bringing the cars under and keeping the pedestrians at grade. There's no way I would be proposing having us go walking underneath. That would be bad. It's a tough one, you guys. I don't know what you're going to do. I'd be very interested to see what you're going to come up with. I don't know. Aside from shutting down everything and just having bus lanes going in and just making everybody figure it out. I don't know what you're going to do, but I will be very curious for the next meeting.
I expect it to be a challenge, but as I said when we were first talking about this project, I expect it to be an exciting one. It is one of those intersections that as a traffic engineer you look at and you go, I know I can come up with something better than that. So
I think anytime, if this had been, if somehow this escaped being a grade separation 50 years ago, I mean, it's so anything with so much traffic going through would have naturally become a grade separation. Somehow it escaped that. And I don't know if we're better or worse off at this point, but here we are.
I know a local example of the under is Route 99, Sullivan Square, right? Close by.
Yeah.
And I think that's a floating section. That's why I'm not sure, being this close to the river, if we would run into that same situation here.
yeah, I'm sure your groundwater would be a challenge. And that's why going under gets expensive, creates a lot of challenges. So that certainly comes into the evaluation
In
process.
terms of heads over, given the challenges and the reasons why not, I'm thinking it could be an opportunity to do something really nice like the North Bank Boston Ped Bike Bridge, something that looks very attractive, very, if you do it in such a way, because the approaches are so long in each direction here, it may flow without having a ton of scissor back and forth potentially. If people are open to it, don't want to force anyone.
Put
Okay,
shopping
well-
up there or something. Like some of those bridge, like a bridge somewhere in Italy where they have, commerce on the bridge.
So if there aren't any other comments from the working group members, we'll just do a quick last call. Then I think we have one question from the public. So without seeing any hands, and certainly if something comes up, go ahead and raise it. So this is a question from Betty Lowe, who says, are there any densification plans? I think I'll hand that over to Joe.
Yeah, so we're looking at densification. We don't have, obviously on our team, any densification plans ourselves, but we're looking at densification and potential changes in the neighborhood in a couple of different ways. One of them is to look at the developments that have already been proposed or are under construction. So by a review of what's going on in the different cities and towns in the study area, we've assembled a list of 20 of those that we're keeping updated. And that includes some that you might be familiar with, a lot around Assembly Square, the new hotel that's going up at Station Landing in Medford, for instance. So that's one angle that we're taking on that. Another angle that we're taking on that is, as we evaluate alternatives, we'll be looking at how well they function under a set of development scenarios that includes what was what is in the 2040 estimates from CTPS, so the regional model, and with the input of the various towns, potentially some other scenarios. Those are still a little bit undetermined, that are based around zoning or that are based around various neighborhood plans and development proposals from the various municipalities.
Great, thanks, Joe. And so I see just a quick note from one of our working group members. There is a suggestion here in the chat box on a spectacular new floating cycle roundabout. So we will put that in the notes, check that out. Thanks, Amber. And then we have another question here from a member of the public. This is Betty Lowe, who thanks for this meeting. Two questions. So one, will there be further opportunity for public input besides the end of this meeting? Can we reach out to working group members for further discussion since some are public officials and community group leaders? And then the second part of that question is, dense mixed-use developments are often touted as solutions to congestion, but much of what's being developed is at luxe price points. What is being done to preserve income and class diversity? So I can go ahead and take the first part of that question about input. So there is a study comment form that is featured here on the slide and is available through the public website. So taking comments all of the time and get a response from a member of the project team. I can't speak for reaching out to some of the working group members. It sounds like Alicia might want to take that one. And so I will, you can go ahead and unmute, and then maybe perhaps we will go ahead and then answer the dense mixed use question. Alicia?
So actually, I mean, you're always welcome to reach out to public officials and the city. But actually it's the dense mixed use developments that if Betty is not aware, I think that members of the working group and the consultants are aware, the city is just launching our comprehensive planning process. So that's one step. We have our first big public meeting is June 9th. Honestly, the press release that has the sign up link for that meeting, I expect to be on the city's website later today or tomorrow. But actually if the calendar item is there, you can sign up for June 9th. We'll both be talking about what's going to be involved in that and starting to take public input. We are also just finishing a housing production plan where we're looking at affordable housing. So Medford adopted inclusionary zoning. I guess it was almost about 2 years ago now. So developments over a certain size are required to have a certain percentage of affordable housing, and that's certified affordable housing that's restricted to income groups for occupancy. We're also, with the housing production plan, putting forward a number of different ideas of things that we're looking to consider, and it's linked off the website for the Department of Planning, Development, and Sustainability. There's a lot of information about the housing production plan. You can read the draft plan. While we're actually about to finalize that plan, we'd be happy to get feedback on it as well. And you can always send email to our office. Our current email address is OCD for Office of Community Development at medford-ma.org.gov. And our phone number is 781-393-2480. And we have a number of staff who are able to talk on these topics.
Thanks, Alicia, and thanks everyone for a great discussion. I'm going to hand it back over to Michaela for some closing remarks.
Thanks, Erica. Next slide, please, Leah. So this is a graphic of our study schedule, and this includes our anticipated working group and public meetings. Next slide, please. So as part of our next steps, there will be a public meeting, and then the analysis of future conditions and the development of improvement concepts will occur. And during that process, we'll have our third working group meeting to share findings from that process and gather input. Next slide, please. So we plan to have the first public meeting and the next working group meeting this summer. And like Erica mentioned, if you need additional information, if you have questions or comments after this meeting, please feel free to visit our website and feel free to email me as well. And of course, for members of the public who are in attendance today, I encourage you to sign up to receive study updates on our website if you haven't already. The materials from this meeting, including the video recording, will be made available on the study website. And so with that, that concludes today's meeting. I want to thank you all again for joining us today and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks.